Income Tax 2020, Schedule C, Identification Numbers. Come in, relax with Income Tax 2020. Schedule C, Identification Numbers. With regards to our income tax equation, we're going to be on the first line on the income line, although it's a bit more confusing in that we're going to have the Schedule C having gross income and the expenses, which are in essence deductions on the Schedule C, and then what is basically the net income of the business. Then it's going to roll forward to the top line, the income line of our income tax formula, where we will then apply the above the line and below the line deductions to get to our taxable income. So when thinking about the Schedule C with regards to the 1040, some of the lines that will be affected on the 1040 include the other income, which is going to be flowing through to here, the Schedule 1, Part 1, and the Schedule C. We then have the above the line deduction for half of the self-employment tax, which is going to be coming from the Schedule 1, Part 2. We then could have the qualified business income deduction, and then that would give us down to the taxable income. So there's multiple areas that can be affected with the Schedule C type of business. This is an example of a Schedule C here. We have the $125,000 up top on the income line item. We have the $25,000 just our only expense here, but just note that these expenses are basically deductions on the Schedule C, giving us that $100,000 that flows then forward ultimately to the 1040, to the income line of the 1040. When filing a Schedule C, the IRS is going to need some type of identification number for the owner of the business. Now, if there's no other identification number that will be used, then because it's a Schedule C sole proprietor business, then the default number will be the Social Security number. However, you might have another number, which would be like an EIN number typically, that could be identifying the business. Because it's called an EIN number, people often think that you don't need one unless you have employees, which is kind of the case. I mean, if you do have employees, then you're going to need an EIN number in order to process the payroll properly. However, if you don't have employees, you still may want an employer identification number, because that's the number you're going to have to report to other people. In other words, for example, if you're a contractor and you do work for somebody else, they then are supposed to issue you possibly a 1099, and to issue you a 1099, they need your number to identify the business that you're working in. If you don't have an EIN number, they may ask for your Social Security number, which is typically a number you don't want to be giving out. So in those situations where you have to basically give your number out to people in the course of business, then it would be nice, even if you don't have an employees, to have an employee identification number, even as a Schedule C. So most of this information is coming from the tax guide for small business. Although the 2020 form or Schedule C is out, and we'll be taking a look at it in our example problems, the 2020 guide is not currently out. So we're going to be taking the 2019 information, modifying it where we can, but just note that we're starting from the starting point of 2019. When you do your research, if you are asking a question in kind of like a gray area, then one place that's a good place to start is the tax guide. And if you're looking at 2020, the guide should be out shortly for 2020, so that's a good place to start your research. We might provide a link to that, or you can find it on the IRS website at irs.gov, irs.gov. So identification number types. We might have a Social Security number, which would be an SSN. Notice again, we're thinking about the sole proprietorship. So the sole proprietorship is not a separate legal entity such as a corporation is, and therefore we could think of it as being tied to the owner, and that would be tied to the Social Security number, the SSN. If they don't have a Social Security number, it might be an individual taxpayer identification number, or an ITIN. So if that's the number that's being used to identify the taxpayer and no other number was being used, then you can use that one. And then we have the employer identification number, which is the EIN number. So again, if you're just set up a business and you just start doing business and you don't do anything special like look for an employee identification number, then the business will be labeled under you, and you to the IRS are labeled as a Social Security number or an ITIN, individual taxpayer identification number. You may want then to get a separate number, even though it's not a separate legal entity, that separate number then being an employer identification number, so that you can provide that number when appropriate within the bounds of like normal business transactions, such as when someone wants to 1099 you for work that has been done. rather than giving your other taxpayer identification number out. Now, as you do the tax preparation, you might get questions from clients that are thinking about setting up a business, and the question is often, what do I need to do to set up a business? Or you might have someone who has a business and they're saying, hey, I don't have an EIN number. Should I get an EIN number? What's the process to set up an EIN number? Now, obviously, the answer to the first question, what do you need to do from a federal government standpoint in order to set up a business? Not much, right? You just need to start earning money, file a Schedule C, basically, and the federal government wants their share as the silent partner. So from a federal income tax return reporting purpose, there's not a whole lot you need to do, very little you need to do in order to start up a sole proprietor business. From a state perspective, you of course might have other things that are going to be involved in terms of state licenses and in terms of what type of business you're going into, what kind of regulations might be included in that business. But from a federal income tax income reporting standpoint, then you don't need much in order to report. Now, the EIN number is something on kind of like the federal side of things as opposed to the state side of things that you may want to get. You don't need to get it in order to file the return unless you have, certain circumstances such as having employees, but that's mainly to file payroll taxes. So you don't really need it for filing the federal income tax, but you may want it because if you need to give your number to somebody, such as, for example, if you do work as a contractor and somebody wants to issue you a 1099 as they are required to by law, then they're going to need some type of identification number. And if you do not have an EIN number, then they're going to ask for your social security number, which you don't typically want to pass out. So that means that you may want to set up an EIN number even if you don't have employees, and it's a fairly easy process to look into. Oftentimes you can do it basically online or by mail. So you can go to the IRS website to research it, irs.gov, type in employer identification number or EIN number, and then you can see the requirements to go through this, and it's a pretty straightforward process. You can determine your eligibility, understand the online application, and submit your application right there, and that's a pretty quick process. It's pretty easy to set up usually. It's more difficult oftentimes to remove the EIN number, but that shouldn't be too bad as well. So I would think many small businesses might benefit, have more peace of mind to have the EIN number so that they can have a number to give to people other than their social security numbers in those business situations where that would be required. So we're going to go into the social security number and ITIN. Now, these two numbers, obviously, hopefully most people, have already. Usually when you do tax preparation, they obviously have the ITIN or the social security number in order to process the tax return. And the question is about the EIN number. But we'll go through all the identification numbers here because, again, they could be used for the Schedule C as well. So generally, use your SSN or social security number as your taxpayer identification number. So this is the individual taxpayer identification number. Obviously, the IRS sees all of us citizens as a number, typically the social security number. So you must put this number on each of your individual income tax forms, such as the Form 1040 and its schedules. To apply for an SSN social security number, use Form SS-5, application for a social security card. This form is available at Social Security Administration, SSA, offices or by calling 1-800-772-1213. It is also available from the SSA website at ssa.gov. So notice the social security number, although issued or used for federal income tax purposes, is not administered basically through the IRS, but through the Social Security Administration. It's still a government agency, of course, but that's where you'd want to go if you have questions about the Social Security number. Then we're looking at the individual taxpayer identification number, the ITIN, basically the default number for those who don't have a Social Security number, and the IRS and the government still wants to identify them as a number. And so now we have the ITIN. So the IRS will issue an ITIN if you are a non-resident or resident alien and you do not have and are not eligible to get an SSN Social Security number. The ITIN will expire for any taxpayer who does not file a federal income tax return or who is not included as a dependent on the return of another taxpayer for 3 consecutive years. In general, if you need to obtain an ITIN, you must attach Form W-7 application for IRS individual taxpayer identification number with your signed original completed tax return and any other required documentation and mail them to the address in the instructions for Form W-7. Exceptions are covered in the instructions. If you must include another person's social security number on your return and that person does not have and cannot get an SSN social security number, enter that person's ITIN. The application is also available in Spanish. The form is available at irs.gov/order forms. So that's going to be the process for the individual taxpayer identification number. And again, if you're looking at the Schedule C, most of the times you have questions about the EIN, employer identification number. Do I need one? Would it be beneficial for me to have one? So here are the circumstances when you would need one. You must have an EIN number to use as a taxpayer identification number if you do either of the following. One, you have pay wages to one or more employees. So if you pay wages, then your social security number is no longer sufficient. The IRS wants another EIN number in order to track that process. So if you have employees, then you're going to need an EIN number and file pension or excise tax returns. So these are the 2 circumstances where you're required to have an EIN number. And then if you don't have employees or file excise tax returns, you may not be required even if you have a Schedule C business, but may want to have the EIN number so that you have that separate identification number for the business, separate from your social security number in the event that you need to give it to someone in the course of business so that you don't have to give your social security number.